So, hi everyone. Welcome to another episode of Unpacking Possibility. I'm your host, Traci Stein. As always, I'm so happy to be here with you today. My guest today is so fascinating. He has so many interesting and very important things for us to talk about. I'm going to tell you a little bit about him, and then I'm going to let him tell you more about himself and his journey. But my guest is Dr. Howard Eisenberg. Howard is a physician. He's got graduate training in psychology. He's written a very compelling book that talks about everything from consciousness to where we're going as a species, to the future of humanity, to our heart, head, gut, and how these all are related to so much more. Howard's book is Dream It to Do It: The Science and the Magic, and the title kind of says it all. But without further ado, Howard, welcome.
Thank you. Glad to meet you.
Likewise. Your book is so compelling. And as I mentioned before we started recording, I'm about halfway through it. It really does deserve and kind of require a thoughtful read. I took a lot of notes. I think it's the kind of book that people will go back to and need to read again because there's so many important things you touch on. But I don't know if you want to give like a quick synopsis of your book and your journey and how you got there, because it's certainly not the conventional physician journey.
Certainly not. And
Understatement.
I will try to do it quick. So yes, I am a physician. I am also a scientist. Um, Broadly speaking, a brain scientist. Uh, I started out in life very curious about everything, literally, and particularly had a desire from almost a pre-adolescent stage of what reality is, what's it all about? Um, is there a God? And if there is a God, why do so many people have such fundamentally different beliefs? And so these were very deep questions for me that weren't encouraged in my environment at the time, but I pursued them through reading. I was obviously pre-computer age and was very interested in science fiction because it was imaginative and I enjoyed playing with imagination. And somehow came across, in science fiction terms, things like teleportation and time travel. And this is, again, still pre-computer age. And I started to wonder, is any of that really possible? And is anybody maybe doing like anything serious in terms of researching it? And I found out about the parapsychological research of people like J.B. Ryan down at Duke University in North Carolina, who I eventually met, by the way. And I started to realize, like, wow, there are real scientists doing research in this area. And I decided back in my teens, I want to really get involved in this somehow. I was also very interested broadly in the mind and psychology. And I had a long time mission in wanting to help people in various ways. So I chose a combined program in medicine and psychology, which itself was a very interesting manifestation because the university wouldn't allow you to do. This was McGill University, those two programs at the time. No one had done it before. And they gave me all types of their limiting beliefs as to why it could not be done, but I prevailed. And the research I did on the psychology side was on telepathy.
Oh, wow.
And the research outcome was highly successful. And it was in a very controlled environment because I was dealing with almost a fortress of skepticism about such things. At the time, the chairperson was D.O. Hebb, who was the father of neuroplasticity. He's the one who coined the term cells that fire together, wire together. And he had gone out and print in one of the APA journals, American Psychological Association journals, and said that although the evidence for psychical phenomena, which we studied in parapsychology, was impressive, he rejected all of it because it was a priori impossible. He said in print. He was very bold about his thoughts. And I took it upon myself, stupid, youthful naivety and just, are maybe less prone to limitations and breaking through barriers of others. And I decided I'm going to do the research in his department and I'm going to get him to recant. And I did. And I actually quote in the book that he subsequently, after my research, announced that he was now willing to accept the existence of psychic phenomena, at least some of it, which was a major, change for him. And then I went on to introduce parapsychology as a credit course at the University of Toronto. It was the first time it was ever taught
Oh, wow.
as a full credit course. In the meantime, I was developing my medical practice, my psychotherapy practice. I was also becoming an international management consultant, working in various parts of the world for Fortune 10 companies and government sector as well. And I got more involved in my medical practice over the years and some of the consulting work and left behind what I was doing in the parapsychological arena from the research at McGill University on telepathy. But several years ago, I was invited by an old acquaintance from those days to do a keynote presentation for the annual meeting of a conference of healers due to therapeutic touch, laying on of hands, as the Bible would describe it. And to do it justice, to honor the invitation, I did a very, very deep dive, which you're experiencing partly with the book, into everything that had come out under the sun in the last 50 years in parapsychology, literally about a half a century, and modern physics, and cross-anthropological studies, and comparative religious studies, and the indigenous teachings, and the latest developments in psychedelic research, what we're learning about neuroplasticity. Uh, all of that, as so as you said correctly, there's a lot in that book, and it's not an ordinary book. Let me come back to why I wrote the book, because I think this is important for what we're discussing now and the state of the world right now. When I did this deep dive, I was getting, again, an up-to-date, quick sense of new developments in science, new understandings, conceptually, theoretically. But then something totally unexpected happened, and at first it was very unwelcomed. I suddenly, in the midst of this deep research and compiling some notes, out of the blue, put out any special setting or drugs of any sort, nothing of that nature. I suddenly had the realization that my whole sense of reality was totally wrong. It was a 180-degree flip for me. I suddenly realized there is no independent physical reality out there at all. It's all coming from within. Just as within a dream, we have content in a dream. There are people, there may be other sentient beings, there's inanimate objects, but it's all coming from our imagination, from our mind. And I suddenly realized that. And I said it was unwelcome. It was a surprise, but unwelcome too, because it meant I'm all alone. There's no one else. I'm all alone. Fortunately, it morphed very quickly in maybe a matter of seconds into the opposite awareness. I'm not alone. I'm connected to everyone and everything. And with that sense of connection, the realization of that, I suddenly also realized why our world was in such a dark place and getting worse in so many different sectors. Because we're so caught up in the external distraction of illusion. We were missing the real truth, the real opportunities. And so I felt with that awareness compelled, literally, I have to write this book to wake up people, to try to do, as a doctor in a sense, preventative medicine. Like, we're really headed for disaster in so many different ways. And for whatever reason, people aren't realizing this, and it's not being taught. In the New Age field, as you well know, I'm sure too, there are many, I call them false pretenders, people who do it just for profit
Oh my God,
or
yes.
ego. And I've been disillusioned a number of times with people I thought were genuine and realizing, no, it's just a way of earning income or gaining popularity and power sometimes. I self-published this book at my own cost out of my retirement savings in many ways. I'm 79 now. I still work part-time, but basically on my retirement. And I just feel I have to do this. I have to share this. The design of the book is unusual. It's not just a lot in it. It actually has a psychedelic design. If it's read slowly and with reflection, which is how I encourage it, it actually guides you on an awareness to this expanded state of consciousness. And in the latter part of the book, which I don't think you've reached yet perhaps, it actually shows you exercises so you can start experiencing it, not just knowing it intellectually, but actual exercises right then, within minutes, to start experiencing some of this. So that's my hope for the book, to literally wake people up to the realization we're all connected. The greater reality is within us. And so concepts like the golden rule from religion, and there's many different cultures of a version of that, are so true to the reality. It's not just about morality and ethics. It's about reality. That's my short version.
So I want you to know it's extremely rare. You can ask my husband or anyone who knows me
Mhm.
that I have a hard time thinking about what I wanna say.
Mhm.
But it's such heady stuff that it's like, there's so much there that it is hard for me to kind of decide where to go next with this because each path from what you just said would be equally important and intense. So, where do we go from that? Because, I mean, I'm just gonna recap a few of the
Mhm.
threads of what you've
Mhm.
said. So you said our world is going into a dark place where people are feeling a more disconnect. I'm paraphrasing. If I get it wrong, I want you to correct me.
Mhm.
Um, we're feeling more disconnected from our true nature and from each other.
Yes.
We're feeling much more disconnected from the planet. Not all of us, but we're
That as well.
yeah,
Nature.
right.
Yes.
I'm gonna say this, and I wanna be thoughtful, and it might still come
Mhm.
out wrong. You alluded to people who are, I'm gonna say some, not all, but leaders in some sort of spiritual way in this kind of there's like a spiritual field, right?
Mhm. Yes.
And this commercialization of it, and this Instagramming of it, not that that's a bad tool in and of itself, it's not, it's a great way to
Mhm.
reach people, but there are a lot of people that if you scratch the surface, you're like, this person is putting themselves forth as someone who can kind of show people the way. That is like a something we all want to aspire to.
Yes.
And
Yes.
even though, whether it's religious or spiritual,
Mhm.
there's a subset of people who are not walking the talk. And it is very ego driven.
Right. Unfortunately.
And it's
Yes.
like if you notice it or you say something, it's like the emperor's new clothes, right? Everybody's like, "No, the clothes are great."
Yes. Yes.
So that's just one aspect of it, and I maybe I started with that because people are looking for clarity and maybe guidance, and some of the guidance out there is not it's at odds with this idea of oneness, love, and connectedness. And you won't be that freaked out by this, but I was thinking about that today. I was thinking about somebody specific who is, you know, I get a leader in the spiritual field and I think is a
Mhm.
profoundly unspiritual person. And it makes it really hard for the rest of us to know, like, well, how do we find a way where we feel better inside of ourselves and more on our own true path and help make the world a kinder place? Maybe that's where I'll leave that.
All right. So I'll pick up from that. And you have a correct sense of, what I've described and where I'm going. So people today, again, from my point of view, are almost delusionally distracted into thinking that reality is what's out there. And so part of that, in terms of what's out there, is that we would see ourselves as being separate from other people, separate from nature, and so on. And that's like a delusion. It's contrary to reality. But that's not what people know in their experience. It's not what they're being taught at this point. And the technology, be it smartphone and tablets and the computers themselves, are increasingly leading people to be focused outward as opposed to inward. But to quote the Bible, be still and know God. We have to become more comfortable with, in a sense, doing nothing and be more into being than doing. We have to learn to become more open to what's within us. There's an expression in sort of more of the poetic literature about intuition, the still quiet voice. And if you open yourself to it, you do get that deeper sense of correctness, of meaning, of value. I also refer to the heart. Talk about in my book that in Western science, we we have such amazing misunderstandings of reality. Even if I talk just conventionally, forgetting, spirituality is such for a moment, and the
Yeah.
larger reality. We are taught. I'm again a graduate of both medicine and psychology. We are taught and still being taught that the brain in our head is the source of our mind, of our consciousness. And not only is there no evidence for that, there's not even an accepted theory that can explain how a physical, material brain can give rise to subjective, immaterial consciousness. None. More so, without again going into anything woo-woo, we now know
Which you
the
can.
heart. We now know the heart itself is a brain. The heart has neurons, nerve cells. The heart has memory, its own memory system. The heart has more nerves going up to affect and modulate the function of the brain in the head, and the head brain can affect the heart. The heart can also produce hormones like oxytocin, the bonding, the love hormone. And some of the research at places like HeartMath, the Institute of HeartMath, have shown that the heart might even be an intuitive portal in a sense that it's outside of time and space. So if we tune into that, which sometimes is referred to as path of the heart, that would be, again, be a very helpful guide for people. When you meet people, if you're allowed to be aware of it, aside from what you see visually, and aside from what they may say or what you intellectually have known about them, previously or from others, you get a sense, if you're open to it in your heart area, of whether this is someone you can trust, be open with, or you need to be protected. And you can actually learn to recognize the subtle feelings in that area. It's teachable, it's learnable. So again, if we were to guide ourselves more by quietude and going inward, we would become more aware of what is true, what is good, what serves us well and others, because we're all connected.
Uh, Absolutely. And I know that in your book, you also talk about the gut and the gut as another brain,
And
which
that's a third brain, which is again, we refer to sometimes as the microbiome.
yes.
And on one level, it sounds strange for some people. That's the bacteria in our large bowel, our colon, which have more DNA collectively than we have in our entire human body. And secondly, they can produce a number of substances, including things like serotonin. And many of the medications in psychiatry today still are variations of the SSRI, selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors. And people think that that's changing the chemistry in the brain. But 90% of serotonin isn't coming from the brain. It's coming from the microbiome. And things like eating a healthier, a more nature-like diet, as opposed to processed fast foods, help us have a healthier microbiome. It's good for our well-being, but it also affects psychological functioning because they produce neurotransmitters. So again, if we just look at conventional science, it's wrong in the assumption, because it is an assumption, that it's the brain in our head that gives rise to our consciousness. We have at least three brains physically, all of us: head, heart, and gut.
Reminds me of, I know she's passed quite a while ago now, but Candace Pert, when she came out with her book Molecules of Emotion, and how radical that was for so many people. And now more people are getting that. But you're absolutely right. It's not common knowledge. And people still do think of the brain as, I don't even want to say the master computer, but like the soul computer for
Mhm.
our awareness.
Yeah.
And I get why. But your book really challenges people to think about their concepts of the self differently, and our purpose, and how we relate to the collective very differently. You have a funny quote. It's not funny, but it is. A Deepak Chopra quote, "Do not
Mhm.
confuse yourself with your selfie."
Yeah.
And there's so much in that quote. Again, if we're looking at the world today and the superficiality, and I'm not trying to sound like
Mm.
like everything is terrible. It's not, it's more complex than
No.
that. But the pressure to project an image, which isn't reality, to identify with this unreal self, and to feel bad about our authentic selves because of the other unreal images we see. And it just gets us, we're human. I'm no different from anybody else. I'm not pretending to be, but these things are making us feel more isolated and less worthy and more disconnected with this kind of greater thing out there, our greater purpose. And, I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about where you think we should be headed and how we might get there. I know that's kind of a big ask.
Well, I'll start with where we're currently headed.
Yeah.
and why it's so disastrous. So we're currently headed to, again, an increasing attention distraction by the outside world, whether that which is outside of our internal sort of egoistic self-consciousness. And now with the development, particularly of AI and the speed at which it is developing, people are deferring more and more to AI to help them in their jobs and all types of jobs. And eventually, unfortunately, will dominate the entire workplace, even for professionals, doctors and lawyers. It's already starting to do that in part, and engineers. And it's dumbing us down. So on the one hand, we think, oh, this, enriches us. We can know so much more. We can produce so much more and of higher quality, but at our own expense, which we don't see right now. We're blind to that. Because the more we use the external information technologies, the less we're using our own potential abilities. And our own abilities start fading and become weaker. We know with brain scans, with, for example, fMRIs, there's actually changes in the brain structure of people who are using AI a lot. Even though it's only recently out, we can already see neurological changes, and they're not in the desired direction. So the direction we're going in right now, again, is increasingly reliance on the external and devaluing and underutilizing our own native abilities and increasing our sense again of of separation and distraction from everyone else. So before the introduction of the smartphone, when people were out and about, they would occasionally see people they knew and say hello, nod their head. They might meet some new people too when they're just out and about. When people got together for meals, be it at a restaurant or at home, they'd be looking at each other. They weren't looking at their screens. That's not the world we live in right now. And there's an expression called inattentional blindness. So you think you're aware of what's out there, but you're not because your attention is preoccupied with something's distracting you and you don't realize it. That's why, for example, it's so dangerous to text while you drive.
Oh,
In
yeah.
fact, it's more dangerous than alcoholic intoxication. So we need to become, when we're going in the wrong direction, as I said, we need to become less reliant, less dependent on the external technology. More time, as I said again, being quiet, unplugging, and allowing us to connect with what's within us at a deeper level. I also point out in my book and with examples that everything humankind has ever discovered, developed, invented, however you want to put it, manufactured, everything without exception has come from imagination, which is another form of proof about where reality really is. So, as students, especially in the earlier age, in the school system, we're discouraged from daydreaming, pay attention again to the externals as if it's devalued, like don't just, daydream. But I repeat, everything we have developed came out of imagination. In a sense, we dreamed it into existence. That's where it comes from. And we're losing that awareness, we're losing that practice, that discipline.
And the attention span and, like, as you said, the ability to connect to other people. You're making me, think I wish I'd paid attention to who the artist was, but on my phone, I was, doing this scrolling thing now
Mhm,
because my
mhm,
brain's very conditioned to look for that,
mhm,
like most people.
mhm,
And there was some exhibit or by this photography exhibit, or it was some story about this where a photographer took all of these photos of people on their smartphones and all
mhm,
these settings, but then photoshopped the smartphones out of the
mhm,
images.
mhm,
And it is the most unnerving thing to look at because all of these people are literally in close proximity to each other, but they're facing away and they're staring at
mhm,
it just looks
mhm,
like people staring at their hands in
mhm.
every kind of situation. And
Yeah,
that was so important because what you mentioned just reminded me of that, and that
and
series.
that's a good
Yeah,
illustration of it. Yes,
it's kind of emblematic
scary.
of that. You talk in your book. I wonder if we can move over a little to the psi unconsciousness realm, if that feels
Sure,
okay?
it's my passion in many ways.
So much we could explore here. And I have explored that with some guests on this
Mhm,
podcast. But you talk about psi, which is
mhm,
kind of taboo still, not kind of, in medicine, still very taboo. In psychology, you know, largely taboo still, even though there is quite a bit of data on that. You touch on things like quantum entanglement, thoughts being things, our connection with source. So I'm wondering, these are just some of the things, but I would say take whatever thread feels like the one to go with
okay.
right now, and or
Um,
something completely different. But I've always been fascinated by that because this is all I'll say. You face risk when you are in the profession you're in,
mhm,
of being kind of dismissed,
mhm,
even though there are more and more scientists and physicians of all sorts coming out now and saying these things
mhm,
are true.
mhm.
But it's not without cost still to talk about.
Well, there are many people in scientific and academic positions who do have a personal interest in such things, but they are very inhibited, very fearful of going public. And I actually know of examples over the past where people have lost their positions or their research grants when they came forth what their true, interest might be. When I decided to write this book, again, I'm a licensed physician. I was aware that I might be jeopardizing my licensure, exposed as, a nut. Like, why should he practice? Um, I'm glad and appreciative to say to this date, the book's out about 3 years. I have not had one single bit of criticism from any professional anywhere in the world. And I have people all over the world. If you've seen the testimonials on my website, some very eminent people. I didn't ask them to do it as a favor to me. I mean, these were spontaneous testimonials in almost all cases. So it did come up, as a potential fear for myself. I thought it's worth the risk, given what I think is at risk for the world right now. And I think it's about partly, which I try to teach too, what you focus on. In the beginning of my book, I have an illustration of something from the martial arts. There's a lot of different things in my book that I try to get there, as you know. And that's why you're right. You need to read it slowly with reflection. In martial arts, and often for young students of it, in their classes, at some point, they're often taught to smash through a wooden board with their bare hand. And my son did that when he was 10 or 11, which is how I first experienced it in my life. And basically, it's a real piece of wood held in each hand by the trainer, the instructor. And the students are taught, again, bare hand, one blow, break the board. Now, if you asked most adults to do that without training, one, I think they'd be afraid to do it,
Yeah.
afraid they'd hurt themselves, afraid maybe to embarrass themselves, maybe only just crack a bit. And my son did this while I was watching a demonstration for the parents of the students in the program. And they were all about the same age, 10 or 11. And afterwards, being the doctor, I looked at his hand. It was bruised or worse, there's any fracture. And it was fine. And I was curious. I realized they must have been taught something, if you like, conceptually, that we don't know in general in the public. So I was curious. I said I was very curious when I was younger in many ways. So I asked him, I said, like, how did they teach you to do that? Because I figured something else is going on here. And he said, they taught them not to hit the board, to hit through and beyond the board. And to me, the board represents, I mean, this is true physically, but the board represents symbolically limiting beliefs. So if you smash through your limiting beliefs because you have clear intention and undivided focus, then you get into the woo-woo of materialization. You can make things happen or change things. I want to come back to what you said too, how, medicine, for example, has not embraced, has not caught up with some of these other conceptions aside what I said about the head brain. They're not connecting the dots. And as I said in the preface of my book, one of the things I set out to do basically was to connect the dots. I say it's like a psychedelic design. And for example, let's come back to medicine right now. There's a phenomenon that's well known in medicine and not disputed called the placebo effect, which is when a patient is given something that seems like a real medication, be it in a pill, capsule, or some type of syrup, tonic. And when they take it, if they believe it's the real thing, and usually they do if it's given by, a healthcare professional, they usually get the desired effect. So, for example, if they're having pain, it relieves pain. Believe it or not, if they're having inflammation, sometimes it will reduce inflammation. It even happens surgically with sham surgery. So belief has power. And if you connect the dots, the very phenomena of the placebo effect in medicine, which is totally recognized and accepted in medicine, is an example of psi. It's mind over matter. Or similarly, if we want to go, deeper into the more molecular level of things, with things like um, genetic expression and epigenetics, we now know our mental state can affect the functioning, the on-off or performance of the genes that we have in our inheritance. So we're not just the genes that we inherited physically, because we can modify them. They're also plastic with our mind.
It's so important, and and it's completely true, and it's both magic in a way, right? Because mind matter interactions are, in a way, the stuff of magic,
That is magic.
but
Yes. The real thing. The real
the
thing.
real magic.
Yes.
But it's also I know it's easier for people to kind of grasp and trust in when we're able to offer a scientific explanation for it.
Mhm.
It's just so interesting. I just feel like we find ourselves in such an unusual time right now.
Which to me is indicative, again, that we've made this fundamental error, and that's why. So, as we know, we have political upset in various parts of the world right now, and serious political upset. We have great economic uncertainty almost anywhere in the world right now, in what you do. Um, we have an environmental catastrophe, which is already happening.
Yeah,
The cat's out of the bag,
yeah.
so to speak, as they say. I could go through a long laundry list of all, the horrible things that we currently have to deal with and imminently, unfortunately, the course we're on can expect. To me, in a sense, that's partly a proof that we're so going in the wrong direction. Just like if you're on a road trip and you start discovering, there's no more highway and maybe it's not even, apparently civilized. You're like in a really rough, rustic place out of your normal route where you want to go, perhaps. It's almost like coming to that awareness, like, this is not the direction we want to go in. We don't want to, all of us, not have jobs and be dependent on AA babysitting us, but also being our master. That's not the world we want for ourselves or our children. We don't want to have gas masks to go outside and be able to be in the environment because the air's so polluted, et cetera, et cetera. There's microplastics, as you know about too, which we know particularly for some strange reason concentrate in the brain, and it doesn't do good things.
No.
There's already some data on that. So again, it causes me concern, but for me, it's also um, it reinforces my understanding that this is so obviously not the way, and why it's not the way. Some people think that the solution to things like climate change is technology. That's what's getting us into trouble, our over reliance on technology. That's what's caused the whole problem. It's not going to be the solution.
I'm trying to find an okay way to phrase some of the things that are going through my mind. I'm not sure I'm going to achieve that. We shall see. But, because I don't want people to feel when I say something that it's like I'm just trying to make people feel bad or put people on the defensive or further polarize people because we're so polarized already. But there's such a tribalism. There's such a identification with viewpoints to the point that we can become blind to the destructiveness. And I'm going to be more specific. I'm going to talk about the environment because there are people who are really smart in a lot of respects that are religiously committed to believing climate change is a hoax.
Mhm,
And I have such a hard time with that because, and somebody might be listening and completely shut down because I just said that. And that's not what I want
mm,
because I don't feel like I'm on, like that I'm identified with a group, like a viewpoint because it's a political viewpoint. It's
mhm,
become politicized and it shouldn't. I mean, the data has been there. We
Yeah.
are seeing all these natural disasters. It is it the world is changing exponentially in a terrible way. And, it's there's this groupthink
Yeah.
of, "I must reject this because it seems like it comes from outside of my group," instead of just looking around us. And I feel like I realize I'm going on some weird tangent here, but I think we need to get back to a sense of reverence and gratitude for our planet and treat it like we care. And I don't think that should be a political thing. I think we should get back to a sense of, or I don't know if we were ever fully there, honestly, but a sense of reverence and gratitude for other people and the animals in our world. Like, and I don't see that as being controversial. And I feel like a lot of the things that you talk about in your book, if people could be open to them, could remind us that if we are all connected, every thought we have, everything that we do, every intention that we set and follow through with affects everyone that it affects us as well. You're going to say it
Yes.
better.
Uh, there's a lot to unpack
Yeah.
in what you just brought up, and hopefully I can keep track in a meaningful way for some of it at least. Um, when we're in a dream, sometimes at least for all of us, we don't know at the time we're in a dream. It seems real.
Yeah.
And I would suggest that we're all caught up right now, or the great majority of humanity, in almost a mass hypnotic state where we're almost in a trance-like state out of reality. We know what things like hypnosis, because I have done, for example, hypnotherapy with some patients, that we can do things that seem like magic with them, but just with ordinary people. So I've done demonstrations, for example, where I would take a number from 1 to 10 and remove from someone's memory as opposed to that suggestion. Asked them to go up on a board where people could see them in front of a large number of people and quickly write down the numbers from 1 to 10. But that number is missing. And they don't know that they're missing a number until I sort of snap my fingers and bring them out of it. Similarly, I have been able to teach people to have what we call glove analgesia, to be able to, under hypnosis, stop the sensation of pain. And proving it to them, taking an actual needle, sterilized, and poking it in the skin, drawing a bit of blood, and they feel nothing until they wake up. So, I mean, we know, without it being theoretical,
Yeah.
that we don't necessarily perceive and see what's out there. It can be altered by things like hypnosis, either in a trance-like state, formally, by a therapist, but also by some people who know how to manipulate the masses, which we
100%.
see, and have seen historically many examples of it politically. When we're in fear, that's particularly divisive because you're separate from whatever it is you fear. And if we have fear of the other, which we do right now, it's
Yeah.
very divisive that way. So much distrust, even within families, that many can't have political discussions anymore. They're so polarized. But by contrast, when we come from love, we're connected. And one of the strange teachings in many of the wisdom teachings is about the importance and power of love. One of the psychiatrists who early on attracted me to be more interested in other aspects of the mind and consciousness was the psychiatrist R.M. Buck, who wrote the book many years ago, Cosmic Consciousness. He had a spontaneous mystical experience. And I found the book fascinating, except for one thing he shared near the end of it. He said, so the underlying principle of the universe is love. Ah, that's wacky. I mean, here we're, if you're a doctor and there's a science, come on, really? But now I understand it differently. When you come from love with people, you connect to them. I give the example in my book, in romantic love, when you're starting to fall in love with someone, you look at each other intensely, not at screens of each other, and you can just keep gazing into their eyes. It's just a very natural thing. You just feel connected. It's a good sense of connection. When you go out to a public place, let's say like a restaurant, you can often tell people are newly in love because you're looking at each other more so, aside from the screen issue, or others, anyone more interesting in here. But when we get into our egos, an ego can be very, very destructive in so many ways. We start butting heads. And that's partly why so many marriages fail, whether out, legally in terms of divorce or in reality, they just disconnect emotionally because they start getting into their egos, their separateness, and resenting the other person doesn't see it their way or won't agree to do it their way or look the way they want to look, or whatever it might be. Get into judgment. And it's the ego that causes so much separation. In my book, in my second chapter, the titles are very significant in my book. There's a reason for them in the quotations. So in the second chapter, as you know, it has a pretty bold title. The only thing you can absolutely know. The only thing. So we have all this uncertainty of things we think, we wonder, but there's one thing all of us cannot do, and that is that we're aware. Even if we might be in a dream or we've been drugged somewhat, we're aware. That cannot be doubted. And that's the only thing we cannot doubt. Because I said earlier, sometimes when we're just a so-called normal dream, we don't know it until we wake up. Or other things sometimes can affect our consciousness and disturb our perception and judgment. But it's the only thing you can know. So if you start with that, all you know is you are aware. And you have powers in your mind within you, as you said, almost magical powers, as I said. Whatever we imagine, we can eventually bring into the world. That's our whole history.
So, Howard, I'm wondering if it is a good segue into the idea of manifestation, because I know you talk about that as well. Because whether we're thinking about it that way or not, we're all consciously or unconsciously, I guess, as well, manifesting things every day, all of the time. We're bringing things into being. And some of them are just very mundane. I do this and this happens. I treat somebody like this, or for better or for worse, this is the reaction. And I have
Mhm,
some role and responsibility for that. I'm making something happen. But
mhm.
then on a larger scale, there are times when what we do bring into being can be beautiful and wonderful and feel very magical. Talk to me about manifestation as you see it.
Well, I think everything that we consider reality is one form of manifestation. Everything, because it's all coming from what we call sometimes source, from within at a much deeper level, beyond the ego level of our own individuality. And as I mentioned, the things like in the placebo effect, if someone believes something which is chemically inert, has like no power chemically, is going to actually be curative for them in their body, it often is. That is manifestation. The epigenetics, where again, if let's say people meditate, we know we see changes in the genetic expression of the brain. Again, that's intention materializing into some, different state that we can experience consensually. So I don't think it's just a rare thing. I think it's the way things, so to speak, work. That being said, there are a lot of false pretenders, nevertheless, who seem to suggest that they personally, or the particular technique they have, if you take their courses, will teach you this ability. We all have that ability. We just aren't aware of how to use it and use it properly. But we all have that ability. It's not so rare. The story behind, if we come back to the conventional, like in reality, 3D reality, the story behind the achievements of so many people in different areas of life began with a dream. And that's what powered them through, and it manifested into the reality. I'll come back to my experience academically, if you don't
Yeah,
mind,
of
when I was
course.
much younger. So I had this interest, as I say, in helping people from early age, and I was curious. I was into parapsychology, and I wanted to do, if I could, do serious research on it. And I also didn't mind challenges when I was, younger back then. So knowing the Department of Psychology, which was very famous at the time at McGill University,
Yeah.
considered one of the top in the world,
Yeah.
and Hebb himself became president of the American Psychological Association at one point, as you might know. Plus, he's the father of neurophysicists. Yeah, that like, wow, if I can sort of convert him to see it this way, then I hoped it would open the floodgates more broadly, and academia did not. Uh, it convinced him. The floodgates did not open in academia, as you well know. Um, but back then, I was having this idea, as I say, I'd like to do this. So I went to the university admissions office, and I said, I've arranged with both medicine and the psychology department. They both would accept me as a student, but I need you to allow me to register in two different areas. So I'd be actually two different faculties, faculty of medicine and faculty of graduate studies at the same time. And I was willing to take that on, foolishly perhaps, and I did. And they said, "No, you can't do that." And I said, "Why can't I do that?" They said, "Because no one's ever done that before." I said, "The universe is supposed to be places of leading edge knowledge. Why is that a reason to stop me if I want to do it?" They said, "Well, there's more practical problem. Every student has an ID computer number. He'd be in two different faculties. How would the computer deal with that?" And this is 50 years
Oh
ago,
my goodness.
and big mainframes, right? And I said, "The computers are supposed to serve us and help us, not limit and restrict us." Third one was, "Well, how would we calculate your tuition? You'd be in two different full programs, but you wouldn't be using all of the facilities like doubly. It's the same library and so on." And I said, "I didn't ask for a discount." And they finally gave me a green light. Now that is manifestation. I started with a dream. I was told clearly, "You cannot do this." And again, "You cannot do this, and you cannot do this." I persisted with my intention, kept it focused, kept my cool. I was polite, threw out no threats of lawyers and so on, and I prevailed. That's a personal example, but it's only one of many examples I've experienced in my life. But it's for all of us. It's not just people who have special powers. In fact, many of the people who claim to have special powers don't. They're the fraudulent ones.
It's interesting the way you frame that because it's clearly, I always say that manifestation is this combination of the mystical and the mundane. And I guess we could put imaginative in there too, because you had to have an idea, you had to conceive of this, you had to infuse your emotional energy into it, or it had to be connected. But then you went through these very mundane, physical, logical
Mhm,
steps, and you had to be willing to do that. And I
mhm.
think that sometimes things are packaged as if, maybe less so now, but like, this ritual or this vision board is it. And then you can kind of sit home and watch TV and wait for all the great things to roll in. And, sometimes that happens. But most of the time we have to, I think,
Do things.
yeah, evidence some sort
Yeah.
of commitment and follow through. And it's funny because I hadn't really thought about it this way. I'm just musing. For some people, this podcast episode will be great, and others, they'll be like, "Tracy, get to the point." This is less my strong point.
But you're partly practicing indirectly, even if you didn't want to, when I'm partly, advising for others, let ourselves just be open to what comes up from within. Doesn't all have to be prepared agenda.
Yeah. But, there's so much there, and we are creatures in a way. This is not exactly how you phrase it,
Mm,
but I'm wondering if this is, consistent with what you're saying.
mhm.
We're walking in 2 worlds kind of all of the
Yes.
time. The inner
Yes.
world, maybe 3 worlds. The inner world, the spiritual kind of aspect to our world and this interconnectedness, and then this very kind of concrete, body-bound part, and we're always trying to navigate all 3.
Well, I still say there's two because to me, there's, the external, physical world of separation, of divisiveness,
Mm.
and the source, if you want, the internal world where everything is one. And that includes the spiritual realm, includes everything. Like everything's within the dreamer's mind in the dream, right? Um, so I see it much more broadly that way.
I wanna see what else. There's so much that we have covered, and yet I'm sure there is more. I think you quoted the Dalai Lama. I mean,
Yeah.
I know you did. I mean, you said 2 things that really struck me, and I know we're kind of
Mhm.
bouncing back and forth, but
It's fine.
it's a lot of times my awareness feels more like spokes on a wheel than a linear kind of steps on a road type of
Likewise,
thing.
I'm guilty.
But there are 3 things that seem to be, touching on everything that you've kind of mentioned in some way and things we've covered. This
Mhm,
Dalai Lama quote, "The 3 poisonous emotions are greed, ignorance, and hatred." Getting back to the
mhm,
things that are challenges for all of us, but in our world, especially right now. And then also that our fates are inextricably entwined. So you said pollution or infection in one country affects the entire
mhm,
world.
mhm,
And I thought those things were so profound because, again, where so many of us are seeking, seeking, seeking to feel more connected. And yet, so much of what is encouraged is the exact opposite. I'm gonna tell you
Yeah.
a little weird anecdote. I'm
Mhm.
really all over the place today.
I'm comfortable with this if you are.
So I moved several years ago to an area that I'm gonna call semi-rural, and we have a few acres, and there's a lot of wildlife here. And I actually did go outside one night. I'm sure my neighbors, hopefully they couldn't see me, but I just kind of walked around the property in the dark, kind of intending
Mhm.
for this to feel like a sanctuary, like a safe space for animals.
Yes.
I'm a very
Yes.
big animal person, always have
Mhm.
been, even more so now. And so there are animals all over this area, but
Mhm.
I've noticed that I feel like we've had more birds, more
Mhm.
deer, 100%. Some people wouldn't think that was a plus. Bunnies, a little groundhog family, some wild
Mhm.
turkeys every
Mhm.
once in a while. And I'm 14 miles from Manhattan, so
Mhm.
realize how strange that is for most people to
Yes.
imagine.
Right.
So, if any of my neighbors listen to this, it's gonna be maybe an issue for me, but, we'll go with that. So, I leave little gifts for the wildlife. Not all the time.
Mhm.
I'm not trying to subsidize them completely, I can't do that, but
Mhm.
I will bring my husband will buy these big bags of organic apples, and he probably
Mhm.
gets, like, 2 or 3 out of the bag.
Mhm.
'Cause I'll go and I'll leave little apples for these little beings, and I found a little
Mhm.
squirrel eating part of one, and I
Mhm.
realized this squirrel can't eat this whole apple, and something else will come along and have it, and I left
Mhm.
some for these deer today, and when they saw me walking outside, they started to run off, and I was like, "It's okay,
Mhm.
I'm just leaving this for you," and they stopped, and it's
Good.
like they're like, "Oh, it's you," and I just thought, 1, I feel grateful for them. They are part of our world, even though they are completely different. And I
Yes.
realize we're gonna have to navigate our boundaries because they need to be
Mhm.
somewhat in place. But it also made me think about some of the things you're gonna think, "Where is she going with this?" But with
Mhm.
the the group kind of way of relating versus the individual way of thinking
Mhm.
about every being, because I if I see one deer, I'm thinking about it as that soul, and I'm watching it, I feel connected to it.
Mhm.
But so often they present in groups and without necessarily communicating in a way I can observe easily.
Mhm.
If
Mhm.
they need to flee, they do it as a group. If they're looking for food or water, they come as a group. It seems to be
Mhm.
very intuitive and instinctive, but it's very harmonious. And on this
Mhm.
property, they are coexisting with groundhogs,
Mhm.
chipmunks,
Beautiful.
squirrels, bunnies,
Beautiful.
a
Mhm.
fox that we have. Um, And they're able to do that, and I can observe them with so much reverence, and I was thinking we should be more like deer. And the minute I thought that, I thought of actually somebody I know
Mhm.
who hunts, a whole other
Mhm.
story, but who would
Mhm.
think the worst thing you could be is be like deer because that just makes
Mhm.
you prey. I know I'm going in this weird tangent with this, but I feel like there's got to be a way to be more connected with everything and recognize that we're not all the same. Still survive, like, protect ourselves when we need to, forage as we need to, but realize that we are part of something larger. We are connected. We are not just individuals. Longest example ever.
Well, as you may know, in the indigenous, cultures, this is how they perceive reality. To them, nature is alive. We are part of it. We're not separate from it. That again is, I feel, our distraction and why I say our technology is causing so much destruction. Uh, we're relational beings. We can only exist on this level. And you're right, there's more than one level. In fact, I used the expression in my book, we're amphibious beings. So, like, frogs and salamanders, we can live in water, we live on land, so to speak. Um, and I actually think we have a need to live in those two different realities or dimensions.
Yeah.
Maybe a better way of saying it to you. And the world as we experience it in general, I'm not talking right now, but the direction we're going in, but just broadly that we experience other people, other animals, and other aspects of nature. It's not just an accident that we have that awareness of others. The accident more is our distraction into thinking that there's a total separation between us and others. So again, good for you. You can feel that connection with the deer and so on. I mean, wonderfully. And we need more of that. I, like you, moved out of the city. I'm in a rural setting too, where I have wild animals and sometimes even bears coming on my property. I have the same, valuation of that, but so many people don't. But let me come back to this notion of relational beings. So let me tell you how I understand the connection between where we come from. I'll call it source.
I
In my
love
book, I
that.
use the expression universal mind. Some people would call it God, but then you get into divisiveness. Well, which God in terms of which religious belief in it? What I think is even more fundamental is just to say the source of all. And if we all come out of the same source, and in that level of existence and reality, everything is connected by definition, then why do we also have this other level, this other amphibious level, where we experience ourselves and others somewhat separate from ourselves? I don't think it's a flaw. I don't think it's an accident. I think it's the same reason why we have dreams, like just normal dreams and even daydreams, because sometimes we're bored. And, the mind doesn't want to be totally idle. So it conjectures up things. And if you think of it this way, if the source is all of consciousness and everything that comes into the world as we know it, and it's the only source, it's not like there's a number of, sources or gods up there. In a way, in this expression, one is the only number. So like the experience I had where I momentarily panicked, oh my gosh, I'm all alone. That would not be, I don't think, I know it's hard to use anthropomorphic,
Yeah.
human terms, but it would not be a desirable state or experience for source to have nothing to be aware of. And arguably, to be conscious, to be aware, by definition, I think, you have to have something to be aware of. I mean, how can you have awareness if there's nothing to be aware of? So I think there's sort of a codependency between us as apparent individuals and the source. It needs us to more fully experience itself. And we need it to give us the wisdom and the power to transform the reality around us. So that's how I kind of see it. Let me give you another, maybe more symbolic way of putting it to you. We on Earth have the technology and we have launched rockets with astronauts to land on the moon. While they're on the moon, we're in telecommunications with them, both, auditory and visual often as well. So here we are on this planet, stuck on this planet, if you want to put it that way. But because we've sent our astronauts out there, like on the moon or in the space station, they can allow us to have some experience of what's out there and even bring back, samples from the moon and so on. So it enriches our experience here, even though most of us just stuck on Earth, on the material plane. And I think that's sort of analogous to how it is. So in a way, some people would say like we're avatars for the source. It does not mean we don't have free will. We do, because we're source. When you remember that, and again, going back to the Bible, be still, know God is for us to remember that. Don't be so distracted and don't be so influenced by your emotions. Listen to the still, quiet voice within you. We all have it because we all come from source.
I think that was a really good example. I think it made it much easier to visualize what you're talking about, because again, all of these are very heady concepts. And they're not things people are necessarily talking about at the grocery store. I mean, they could be, but generally, these are things that I think require people to kind of think about and sit with for a while and have different ways of conceptualizing these ideas.
And it's a very different way of presenting this, which was my
Yeah.
intent with the book, as I mentioned. Because, for example, when people go to their various places of worship, they're told what to believe and how to behave. I don't tell people what to do. I explain how reality works. And with that knowledge and wisdom, guide yourself accordingly. Very different than the way, religion relates some of these teachings.
No, definitely. Howard, you had a metaphor in the book And I'd like you to explain it, but
Mhm.
I think it ties into everything you've said about the ocean.
Yes.
I wonder if you'd wanna share that.
Sure. Yes. So I was trying to think also of a visual model to represent what I was just talking about in terms of avatars and so on. And let's take the example of the ocean, and let's pretend we could take a photograph of the ocean and blow it up, and let's say project it on a screen or whatever, and we could point at a wave, and we could point at maybe a smaller wave or a broader wave, like a wider base. Um, and that's a still photograph, and we see them as different. So we could even bring a stranger in and say, like, which is the tallest wave? And they would see what we see and agree, yes, one of these waves in this photograph is taller than the other waves. Now, if it wasn't just a fixed photograph, if it was a video or a real time perception, the waves are changing. Some are becoming larger, some are descending back into the body of the ocean. So it's partly an illusion in the fixed frame, photograph, that they're so separate, that this wave is separate from this wave. Ultimately, they're all coming from the same source, the ocean, the oceanic consciousness or universal mind. And when we do things like meditation, we're descending closer to our base where we're all connected. And also when we do practice like I teach later in my book on lucid dreaming, again, it is a way of diving, deeper underwater, so to speak, closer to source and the enrichment that provides in many ways.
I think
And
yeah, go ahead.
I also, relate this to the Bible again, strange enough. Like what I was experiencing too, as strange as it sounds, is a decoding of the Bible. Like suddenly it had a whole different meaning to me. I didn't hear voices or anything, but a whole different meaning. So, for example, when Jesus says, I and the Father are one, but the Father is greater than I, that puzzled me when I was a kid. I went to a Protestant school system in where I grew up in Montreal, and we had some biblical readings all the time. And at one point that came up. And I remember going to my teacher after class and saying, this is a young student, I don't know, I was 10 or 11. Like, how can that be? How can they be the same, but one is bigger than the other? And I was reprimanded, like foolish to ask such questions. Like it goes back to what some of us were taught later on in life. The finite mind cannot understand the infinite. That was part of, again, what was in our culture and maybe still is, unfortunately. But I puzzled over it. Now I understand it. If Jesus is one with God, but Son of God, it could be like a big wave. So coming from God, connected to God deeply, but not separate from God. God is still the whole ocean, not just that big wave. And then Jesus, in the Bible, we were taught, and went down away from this level, this terrestrial level, but then came back, showing it's not defined by material reality in the external world. So I think it dovetails with a lot of different ways, of explaining this.
It's such a thought-provoking book, and again, I think it's gonna require more than one read for people to really
Definitely.
sit with and meditate on it. I think your next book should be the journal companion piece. No, I'm serious,
Uh,
actually.
well, I have thought of, well, two things. One, because I don't want to be too much into my own ego. This book is about the teaching, not me. And it's a fine line when I'm in situations to discuss the book where I'm not promoting myself as the author or saying you should buy this book. It's just I felt I had to share what I've come to know. Uh, but it absolutely is not an ordinary book.
No.
And it's deceptively small. I wrote it to be small because I don't like padding. I know people don't have attention spans, again, partly because of screen technology. So it's not to be read like an ordinary book, much more slowly. It's probably one of the most information dense books out there, no matter what the size is. And it is mind boggling because it's getting people, to really question deeply all of our basic assumptions we've grown up with and that surround us. But on the other hand, again, our world's not headed to a good place. It's time to open our eyes and reflect.
And I know and related to all that, I if I recall correctly, I believe you mentioned in another interview about how you felt like again, you didn't want it to be coming from your ego. So it wasn't that you were like, I just want to write a book. And there's nothing wrong with that
Mm,
either. But you said you felt like it was channeled information almost, like you felt guided, like it came
yeah.
through you, even though,
Well, I
you're
can tell you
reading
one
about
funny
it.
thing about this. I had written it
Yeah.
half a century before Inner Spaces, Parapsychological Explorations of the Mind, which I used as a textbook for the course I was teaching at the University of Toronto in parapsychology. And the way this book is expressed, not just the content, the way, the manner, the style, if you like, is so radically different. And you might say, well, it's a half a century ago. But I mean, so radically different that I brought the book out in 4 editions. So I tried to make it as user-friendly, accessible around the world as possible. And so one version of it is an audiobook. And at the time, this was still during the COVID era. Although I was funding this myself, I don't have a recording studio. And it would have been kind of prohibitive to go to a real recording studio, plus dangerous in
Yeah.
the middle of COVID, or it seemed in terms of the news. So I thought I'll hire someone, ideally a professional, to narrate it for me. And originally, it's hard to escape our own egos. Originally, I thought it should be a man because I'm a man, and people see a male name apparently, as the author, and it may be jolting to them to hear, a female voice. Then I challenged my own assumption, and I thought, well, the message in my book is actually more, if you allow me, a feminine message than a masculine message. It's not about become powerful and conquer. It's about nurture and protect. It's more of a feminine message. And I thought, maybe it's better for a woman. And secondly, again, I'm back to not wanting it to be about me in any way, aside from the male, gender, female gender thing and the voice. I thought, why not also get somebody who's from a somewhat different culture? So I actually ended up choosing a former BBC announcer,
Oh, wow.
female, um, purposely. So it's not at all, again, about me.
Oh, so interesting. Really interesting.
Oh, and I should add, to come back to this, when I was listening to the rough cut by the narrator for the audiobook, back to my saying how this book is so different, and your question about channeling, at first, I found myself thinking, like, just almost shaking my head, are those really my words? Like, she's basically reading my script, right? The book. No, but it was true. Honestly, it seemed definitely not my ego and not my previous stream of reference in the way I wrote, as I said, my earlier book or other articles and journals since that time. So yes, it had that otherworldly quality. It came from a different level, a different place.
I believe you. Really so compelling. Howard, is there anything that we didn't cover that we should have?
I think we covered the waterfront pretty broadly, and I appreciate, your range as well. Thank you.
I think I appreciate you very much. Thank you so much for coming on today. I know you've got probably a million things to do, and I'm glad we got to have this hour together in this conversation about these really important topics that you cover in such a unique and compelling way in your book.
Thank you. I really appreciate the opportunity and to share it with others as well in your audience.
Thank you. Howard, where's the best place for people to find out more about you and your book?
My website, which
Okay.
is drhowardeisenberg.com, just drhowardeisenberg.com.
Okay. I'll put the
The
link in
book
the
is
show notes.
the book's online. So, in the US, Amazon, Barnes& and Noble are the main retailers. Bookstores generally don't stock it, but anyone could have their bookstore order it because the print is from Ingram Spark, the main book distributor in the world. But the best way is just online. And again, if they want to know about me plus the book, the website, drhowardeisenberg.com.
Wonderful. I'll put the link in the show notes.
Thank you.
Howard, thank you so much for coming on the show. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. And again, good to meet you. Be well.
Likewise.
Thank you.
This has been another episode of Unpacking Possibility. If you enjoyed the episode, and I know you did, please remember to like, share, follow, leave me a comment, let me know what you think. And of course, as always, until next time, be well.